Welcome back to Proxy, everybody, and today we're going to be talking about how to destroy the Green Tide with the Aeldari. Now, as you guys know, the Green Tide has been making waves in competitive play. Its win rate seems absolutely obscene, hovering well over 60%, and they pretty much look unbeatable for the most part. But are they really? They do look very strong on paper, no doubt. Their lists look absolutely brutal, and a lot of players are going to look at something like 120 boys and think to themselves, how can I possibly kill all of this? Well, for all of you guys wondering out there how you can possibly deal with this type of list, I have some good news for you. I am going to be going over exactly that in today's video, and I do have some recent experience against Green Tide, which I would like to show you guys and share with you. So in today's video, we are going to be going over the following. We're not only going to be looking at Green Tide, we're also going to be looking slightly at the other competitive Orc build, which is of course the Bully Boys. So we're going to look at the two strongest Orc detachments. We're going to be looking at the strongest Orc units and their Eldar counters. We're going to go into a couple of the tricks that you need to know to beat the Orcs and the general strategies you want to pursue. And lastly, my recent game against your Green Tide and what I learned from it. And of course, I'm going to give you an overview of the deployment and the first couple of turns of the game to show you guys, kind of what happened and what to do if faced with this type of list. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at the strongest Orc detachments. That would be the Green Tide and the Bully Boys. Now, I'm well aware that there are more detachments, and some of you might, want to say in the comments that, Orcs are strong in other detachments besides just Bully Boys and Green Tide. And that is true. A couple of them are strong, and I think a couple of the other detachments can possibly give Eldar a little bit more trouble than these. The reason why I decided not to talk about Dread Mob or Speed Freaks is because both of those detachments have a quote-unquote gimmick that they use to surprise their opponents, and once you know about it, it's kind of easy to counter. So I decided not to go into those. Of course, if those builds end up being very prominent after maybe Bully Boys or Green Tide gets nerfed, I may have a future video on those detachments in particular. But, if you've killed one Orc, you've killed them all. And in my experience, those two detachments aren't really that much different. They have a few little tricks here and there that Green Tide and Bully Boys don't have. But in other words, they're Orcs. And generally, the strategies that are going to work against Green Tide and Bully Boys are also going to work against those detachments as well. All right, so looking at the Green Tide detachment rules, they're pretty strong, and this is where a lot of people kind of start to, kind of fear this detachment. Boys units get a 5+ invulnerable save at all times. That's just the base detachment rule. So not only on wall turn, but always. And units that are above 10 models, regardless if they're boys or not, get to reroll saving throws of 1, which may seem awesome, but it's actually not that good because Orcs don't have a great save. So basically, to give you guys an idea of this mathematically, if I force 18 saves on the Orc player and the Orc player makes 12 of them, which is, statistics, they're probably going to make 12 of those, then only 3 of those are going to be rerollable because they're going to be 1s, and the Orc player is going to only save 1 additional Orc. So it seems like a big deal, but it's not really a big deal on most boys units. Where this ability is really good is on Mega Knobs. So when this ability is on Mega Knobs, Mega Knobs have a 2+ armor save. If you're hitting them with AP 0, they're rerolling all their failed saves. If you're hitting them with AP -1, they're rerolling half of those. So it's much better on Mega Knobs, and when you face against Green Tide, you will probably see at least 1 unit of Mega Knobs in the army for this exact purpose. All right, so looking at the enhancements are pretty straightforward, but there's a couple of them to watch out for and to keep a mental note of. Bloodthirsty Belligerence allows the bearer's unit to reroll charge and advance rolls. In my game, my opponent put it on the Weird Boy so that after the Weird Boy teleported, you could use, stratagems to make them charge farther. I'll talk about that in a second. And also this to reroll the charge and advance roll as well. So pretty powerful for 15 points, and definitely the one that you want to put on the unit that can deep strike or basically teleport. Brutal but Cunning is just command point regen. It's a 3+ CP regen ability. So pretty straightforward, but if you do see this on a, war boss or something like that, you probably want to prioritize that orc mob so that, your opponent can't get regen as easily. But of course, in some lists, you just might not see this. And the reason is because orcs have the Gretchen, which do basically the same thing, but on a 4+ instead of a 3+. So you might see this, you might not, just depends on the list. But in my opinion, probably a good idea for the orc player to take it. And I think we're a little spoiled as Eldar because we just automatically get a CP from our Autarch, of course. As far as the Green Tide stratagems go, Tide of Muscle allows a unit of boys to add the battle round number to their charge roll in inches. And this is good at all times. It's always worth using at least once per turn if you're going to charge for the orc player. It's good on the first turn. It's great on the second turn. It's OP on the third turn. And on the fourth and fifth turns, it's absolutely insane. Having said that, if the orc player has, 3 or even 4 mobs left by turn 4, chances are you've already been tabled. So, you're probably not going to be in a better position for being able to counter this. But, it is very good, and especially why you want to eliminate as many boys possible in the early stages of the game. Come On Lads allows the player to return D3+2 orc boys to the unit. Personally, I don't think this is a great stratagem for 1 CP. I know it's only 1 CP, but it's only 4 orc boys. Who cares, right? And most of the time, you're going to be wanting to aim to eliminate entire boy squads at a single time. So in my game, it personally didn't come up that often. It did come up once, and honestly, it only resurrected like 4 boys, and that was it. Wasn't a big deal. They died anyway, so, didn't make a difference in the game at all whatsoever. The last key stratagem to think about is Go Get 'em, which allows an orc boys unit that was just shot in the shooting phase to move D6 towards the closest enemy unit. You do want to watch out for this, but again, this was one of those times that really didn't matter because that unit ended up just dying anyway. And especially if the unit is being screened out, it's absolutely useless because it makes the orc unit move towards the closest enemy unit and not the unit that shot at it. So in my particular game, there was a lot of screening going on, and basically the only times my opponent was able to use this were times that my opponent was screened out by a unit that was very close. My opponent didn't want to move closer to that unit, so just ended up saving the CP. But it is something you might want to look out for. All right, so let's talk about the Bully Boys. The Bully Boys detachment rule is if they have a war boss on the field, then you can call a second wall, essentially, even if that war boss is in a transport. However, only war boss, knobs, and mega knobs are affected by this wall, so yes, it does give you a second wall, but it's only for those units. However, in a Bully Boys detachment, pretty much most of the units in their army are going to be mega knobs or knobs. So this can get quite powerful. Now, this is the thing though. It's really powerful on the mega knobs, but it's not really that great on the knobs. Truthfully, as an Eldar player, if they're hitting you with knobs, you're dead, right? Any unit that gets hit is going to die anyway, so you might as well just resign to the fact that that's going to be the case and do your absolute best to murder the knobs afterward. So this is why screening is important, right? If you use Rangers or Striking Scorpions or Swooping Hawks or whatever you have to screen out your opponents so they can't charge your more valuable stuff, when they wall the first time, and yes, they will wall very early because they have that second wall, you can use that time to crush the now exposed knob units. So yeah, your opponent is going to have to expose stuff whether they like it or not. And if you're using things to screen, your opponent is not simply going to be able to shoot your Rangers or Striking Scorpions to death with pistols because orc shooting is abysmal. They hit on 5s, and if you spend a command point, they're hitting on 6s with lightning fast reactions, which I do think in some cases is worth it if your opponent is actually trying to shoot you off the board. Okay, so let's get into the enhancements. So the only one worth mentioning, because the other ones are basically durability or damage buffs. And like I said before, if you're charged by an Orc unit, your unit's gone. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what they have. They could have plus 50 attacks. It really makes no difference. They're going to die. The only one that makes a difference is the Teleporta. And the Teleporta allows a war boss in Mega Armor to deep strike with his unit. Again, this is something that is kind of funny to me. It's not really good, but it can be a bit of a surprise, a bit of a shock if you're not prepared for it. So just, kind of be on your guard. Make sure you have those units that can screen against deep strikers, as well as, knobs moving out of trucks and battle wagons and stuff like that. As far as their stratagems go, Armed to the Teeth allows a unit to reroll hit rolls of 1 or all hit rolls on a WA turn. This is in the shooting or fight phase. Normally, again, this is something that is just a basic damage buff. You're not going to be surviving even against, knobs just charging in normally. You're definitely not going to survive a, basically charge with Armed to the Teeth. However, I will say this, sometimes it's worth baiting this out because Orc players get really excited, and when they don't know their Math Hammer as good as they should, of course, because they're Orc players, right? They will use this ability against something, that's really going to die anyway, right? Like Striking Scorpions or Howling Banshees or whatever it is. And basically it just amounts to a waste of CP. However, I will say this, if you're running a more tough list with Wraiths or the Avatar of Cain or something like that, be aware that this stratagem will absolutely dominate you. So don't expect your Avatar of Cain to survive even with -1 to wound, even with lightning fast reactions. It is going to die because this is an incredibly powerful ability on something like Mega Knobs. The next one is Always Looking for a Fight, which allows a unit of Knobs or Mega Knobs to consolidate D3 plus 3 instead of the normal 3, or 6 inches on a WA turn after destroying an enemy unit. Now, normally I'd say you'd have to watch out for something like this, but because we're Eldar, we have that little nice feigned retreat stratagem, right? We could just fall back, shoot, and then charge as normal for 1 CP. So it's kind of a wash in that case, except you're getting extra attacks because once they consolidate into you, you get some freebies. Which, not going to lie, not going to do any damage, but, it's better than nothing, and, it does kind of waste their command points a little bit. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about the strongest Orc units and their counters. That would be Orc Boys, Mega Knobs, Knobs, Gretchen, Pain Boys, and Weird Boys. Now, I know I'm not mentioning some here. I'm not mentioning Gazgul. I'm not mentioning, the Pain Boss. There's a couple of units I'm not really mentioning much here. And that's just because they don't really appear that much, and they don't do that much more than what these units here do. And they're essentially just different versions of these units. So starting off with the Orc Boys, this is going to be your most standard, kind of configuration of infantry that are your battle line. They're toughness 5, 1 wound, and a 5+ save. They have sticky objectives in OC2. I think the sticky objectives is actually really good. Makes the unit very powerful on objectives and with objective play. And they're basically a strong melee unit in numbers. Their shooting is absolutely awful. They hit on 5s. And for Eldar, that means, of course, we could always simply use lightning fast reactions on them to make them hit on 6s. So they're barely going to do any damage whatsoever. As far as their counters go, Wind Riders and Dire Avengers both are great for mowing them down in both shooting and Overwatch. These two units are the best units in the index to counter Orcs. Wind Riders can, do more stuff against other factions. Dire Avengers do have a specific niche against Orcs, but they're great at it because of that great Overwatch and lethals. And of course, Rangers, Striking Scorpions, and Shroud Runners can either multiply damage, like in the case of Shroud Runners, or screen for you. And, even sometimes Rangers can maybe pick off a Pain Boy. It's not likely. You'll probably need a little bit of luck on your side, but it can happen. And I'm telling you guys, Wind Riders and Dire Avengers put the work in against Orc Boys. It's not even close. It's not like they just have favorable odds. The odds are very stacked in their favor. So, yeah, these two units absolutely great at killing Orc Boys. Mega Knobs, on the other hand, is a different kind of unit because, Dire Avengers and Wind Riders don't do particularly well against them, especially under the WA, because these guys get a 4+ feel no pain, when under the effects of the wall. They're toughness 6, 3 wounds, and a 2+ save as well. So they're very much a extremely hard unit to kill, and they have immense combat damage as well. They will one round pretty much anything with twin-linked kill saws. And they can also be taken in big units of 6, so they are very durable with a boss in Mega Armor or Ghazghkull Thraka himself. However, the good news is they do have some counters. Outside of a Wall turn, they are very susceptible to Bright Lances, Pulse Lasers, Fire Dragons, and D-Cannons, all things that you commonly find in Eldar armies nowadays. However, during the Wall turn, they are very tough and best screened out and ignored. So I know that you can double Wall, essentially, in the Bully Boys, but you got to be patient with it, and you got to wait and screen them out until they're vulnerable. Because if you try to hit them early, they will take that damage and they will laugh, because 4+ Feel No Pain, especially on multi-damage weapons, is absolutely no joke. Especially since they are also getting a 5+ invulnerable save on top of it all. Next up, we have the Knobs, and the Knobs are just lesser versions of the Mega Knobs. They're toughness 5, 2 wounds with a 4+ save. They are -1 to wound against weapons of a higher strength while with a boar boss, and this is very good, but you know, it's not going to help them against everything, but it is still very strong, and they are a very powerful combat unit as well, especially with stratagem support. Their counters are basically the same counters as what kills Ork Boys. Wind Riders with Shroudrunner support and Dire Avengers are both solid. Having those lethal hits means guaranteed wounds going through, and because they don't have a great save, the best they're going to get is a 4+. So, not great, right? 50-50. And Wind Riders are, of course, damaged too. So everything that goes through that's not being, Feel No Pain is going to be a kill. However, I think the most important thing to beating Knobs is being able to screen their transport vehicles or eliminating the support characters that they have attached. So again, if you have something like a Death Jester or Rangers who can, target out the Pain Boy in those units, usually you can, get some good mileage out of your other shooting. Next up, we have Gretchen. Now, Gretchen are one of the funniest units in the Ork roster, I think. Toughness 2, 1 wound, and a 7+ save, so they'll get a 6+ if they're in cover. When they are on an objective they control, on a 4+, they gain a CP. So that's basically why you take them. They're also a very cheap screening unit for your backfield. However, unfortunately for the Gretchen, they're just not going to be able to do it, because one of their biggest counters is the Dark Reapers. The Dark Reaper Exarch with a Tempest Launcher shreds them in a single turn. 2 units of Reapers clears a unit each turn. I took 2 units of Reapers against my Ork opponent, and the Gretchen were dead in 2 turns. Just simply dead. Toughness 2 means you're wounding on 2s. You're not, suffering any hit modifiers, because of course Dark Reapers, and you got those multiple shots and blast. Gretchen just aren't going to survive that. Swooping Hawks are also very effective at it as well, and they can follow up and steal the objective away with a nice little Fire and Fate. So if your Ork opponent is relying on Gretchen to screen the backfield, they have another thing coming. Dark Reapers will blow a hole in their lines, and then the Swooping Hawks will come in and steal the objective from them. The Pain Boy is one of the more annoying characters in the Ork roster, gives the unit Feel No Pain 5+, and watch out in close combat because the Urdi Syringe weapon can cause D6 mortal wounds to the unit if it scores a critical wound. Once per game, it can also restore D3 models to the unit. I believe it has like a little assistant or something like that, a little Grot assistant, which can, kind of restore models to the unit. The counter to these guys is simply damage 2 weapons. Most of the time, again, they're going to be attached to regular Knobs or Ork Boys. So multiple damage weapons will help push damage through, getting past that Feel No Pain. And precision weapons are also pretty good at taking them out, but you need a bit of luck on your side again with those Ranger long rifles. And, because it has Feel No Pain, Death Jesters aren't always going to be able to guarantee a kill. Our last character we're going to talk about is the Weird Boy, and the Weird Boy has a powerful precision attack while in a large unit of boys, so your characters do kind of have to watch out, but the good news is that the Eldar have a lot of, line of sight blocking ability because they're high movement and stuff like that. So we really don't have to worry about that too much. What we do have to worry about is the teleport, the jump, which can be anywhere outside of 9 inches on a 2+. The counters to this, again, are precision weapons, like Ranger long rifles can take them out if you have a bit of luck on your side. And then, of course, be prepared to screen out the teleport. It can be combined with stratagems to essentially guarantee a charge afterward, so you do need to be careful about this. If your opponent gets it off, and if you're unprepared for it, it could be game-changing. So, what are the tricks to beating the Orks? Well, first of all, you have to prioritize damage and screening. Orc shooting is extremely weak, so you don't have to really worry about it for the most part. Despite being Aeldari, if the Orc player tries to shoot you with a bunch of pistols, they're just not going to really do much. You know, it was funny, in the game I played, my opponent did in fact shoot pistols at Rangers because he thought that, you know, he could clear them out with a unit of pistols, and it was embarrassing how little damage he did. Of course, because the Rangers have stealth, so it was just insult to injury when he didn't kill even a single Ranger with the Sluggas. Also, concentrate your forces, but place enough units on the other side of the battlefield to force your opponent to deploy units to match them, as you do want your opponent to spread out, and I think it's pretty much impossible for Orc players not to spread out unless they want to basically give you the win. So, for example, if they try to concentrate their forces as well onto one side of the battlefield, it's so easy to screen them and you will automatically basically get the victory. So your opponent is going to spread out, but that doesn't mean you spread out to match them. Put a few units on the other side of the battlefield, units that are fast that can maybe redeploy easily like swooping hawks, but give your opponent thought and make your opponent spread out as much as you can. All right, so next, we're going to talk about my recent game against the Orc Green Tide and what I learned from it, which is actually surprising. I thought I was in for a really hard game, and it turned out that the results were not exactly what I thought. So my list that I brought to the game was as follows: the Autarch Wayleaper, Fuegan, a Farseer Skyrunner, I had the Weeping Stones on him, a Warlock Skyrunner, Azerman, 10 Storm Guardians, 10 Dire Vengers, 2 units of 5 Dark Reapers with Tempest Launchers, 5 Fire Dragons, a Falcon, 5 Rangers, 2 units of 3 Shroud Runners, 5 Striking Scorpions, 2 units of 5 Swooping Hawks, 5 Warp Spiders, and to round out the list, 9 Wind Riders with Shuriken Cannons, of course. His list was the following. He had 3 Pain Boys, 3 War Bosses, a Weird Boy with the Bloodthirsty Belligerents enhancement. He had Ghazghkull Thraka, 6 units of 20 Orc Boys, 6 Mega Knobs, and 2 units of 11 Gretchen. This was the terrain layout we played on. We just played on something quick. It was already set up for us, so we just decided to play on it. We didn't roll on it or anything like that. We just went right into it. It was terrain layout number 1 with horizontal deployment. All right, so really quick, this is what the deployment looked like. As you can see, all of the Orcs on the other side, it looks absolutely insane. And if you look at the other side of the battlefield, it's like, how is this Eldar player possibly going to kill that many Orcs? Well, as it turns out, it wasn't that hard. And I'll go into why it wasn't that hard in just a second. But as you can see in my deployment, I did spread out a little bit, but everything on the right-hand side of the battlefield was easily redeployable. And what I mean by that is essentially the unit of 5 that you see over there on the right-hand side of the battlefield was in fact a Swooping Hawk unit. That was easy to redeploy. On the left-hand side of the battlefield, I had a unit of 5 Warp Spiders, so they're pretty easy to redeploy as well. And I had a unit of 5 Swooping Hawks in the very back there that you see on the left-hand side of my deployment zone. The Falcon is that weird triangle you see on the right-hand side, and that was basically to counter his Mega Knob. Later on in the game, I knew he was going to push up to the middle objective, so I put my Falcon there for a quick counter. I had a unit of 5 Striking Scorpions infiltrated on the right-hand side of the battlefield as bait, because that unit on my right, basically the Orc unit right across from the Striking Scorpions in his deployment zone, was the unit with the Weird Boy. So essentially my plan there was give my opponent a dilemma. Do I teleport and leave the Striking Scorpions to score objectives and basically run into my deployment zone? Or do I stay there and kill the Scorpions and, not teleport, essentially? And it actually didn't work out exactly how I thought, in a very weird and pleasant way. But anyway, we'll go into that a little bit later. Over on the left-hand side of the battlefield, I had a unit of 10 Dire Avengers set up on the very left, as well as my 9 Wind Riders. They were going to be kept together, and they were essentially going to be killing as many Orks as humanly possible. I had 2 units of 3 Shroud Runners. One is right next to the unit of Dire Avengers on the left side, and one is on the center objective. That unit was going to be saved towards, a little later. Right next to them, I have 10 Storm Guardians, making that objective sticky, but also being in a spot where they could easily screen the right-hand side of the battlefield later on. In front of them, to the center of the battlefield, center right, is 2 units of 5 Dark Reapers. They moved up into the ruins there, and they were soon going to be putting fire onto the Gretchen units that were desperately trying to screen the backfield. And of course, I knew that they weren't going to be able to screen it from my Swooping Hawks for long. I had 5 Rangers set up in the middle of the battlefield, spread across. And again, this was just to kind of prevent the jump from being able to just wreck my army if he got the first turn. And that's basically it. I had an Autarch Wayleaper back there somewhere on the left-hand side, right behind the Shroud Runners on my left flank. And my Farseer and Warlock, of course, were joined to the Wind Riders. All right, so as it happened, I did get first turn, which was great. And what I essentially did was I moved everything up to screen. My Rangers moved up, screened 2 units of Orc Boys from being able to move where they wanted. The Striking Scorpions stayed exactly where they were. Again, they were just there for the dilemma. I didn't want to give them a free kill. Shroud Runners moved up and blocked another unit, also marked a unit with lethal hits. I ended up casting Guide on the Wind Riders this time around because, my Orc opponent wasn't on an objective, so they wouldn't have gotten those natural rerolls, so I decided to just cast Guide on them. The Dire Avengers moved up and advanced. I actually used a 6 with the Fate Dice to make sure I was in a good position there. Which, by the way, I am going to come out with a Fate Dice video because this is one of those examples. Most people will save a 6 for damage, but in this case, a 6 on an advance roll was much better, so I chose that instead. They went up there, they shot, and then the Wind Rider shot as well at the unit to the left-hand side. So that unit on the far left there. And they absolutely wrecked it. My Dire Avengers actually opened up fire first. They only killed like 3 or 4 of them, which was kind of bad. I rolled really bad on that. But I made up for it with the Wind Riders. The Wind Riders absolutely swept the rest of the unit. I spiked on 6s. And I swear, the whole unit just disappeared, characters and all. Which was shocking to both of us. I actually did expect to kill most of the models in that unit. My opponent didn't think I was going to be able to, and he was very surprised. Okay, so what happens next, right? So I move all of my screens up and stuff like that, and I keep a few units in the back, and I move my Storm Guardians up to make sure the jump can't, just end my whole existence. So during his first turn, the first thing he does is declare Dawa, right? He knows that I'm advancing up, and he knows that he needs to close with me as soon as possible. And he planned to use some, the jump and stuff like that to get into combat with me. So he declares his Wa, a little early in my opinion, but after seeing the damage that the Wind Riders did, I don't blame him. And the first thing he did was declare his unit right next to the Orc Boy unit that just got destroyed to advance. And guess what happened? He got overwatched. I overwatched him first with the Wind Riders, who did have line of sight, and they were able to kill like 12 of them. It was pretty insane. Again, I surprised myself with the rolling, but because they had Guide and they were just spiking on 6s, getting both, not lethals that time, but sustained hits, they were just mowing down Orc Boys. And then he moves the rest of them, and he gets overwatched by Zerman and the Dire Avengers, who kill like 8 more. So he has only 1 Orc Boy. I think he had 1 Orc Boy left and a Pain Boy. And that is it. That's all he had left in that unit. But they were in charge range of the Dire Avengers. So that was at least a little bit of a consolation for him there. Oh, and yes, the Dark Reapers did move forward turn 1, I forgot to mention, and they killed the Grot unit on the home objective, so he wasn't getting command points from that. He did get a command point, however, from an enhancement that one of his war bosses had. Now, as for the rest of his army, it did surge forward, but the only unit that wasn't move blocked was the unit of Orc boys to the, I guess we would say, left of the ruin on the right-hand side of the battlefield, right below where it says Aeldari turn 1, or to the left of it, I should say. That unit did move forward, surge forward quite a bit. It wasn't fully screened, and its job was to go after the striking scorpions. And this is the point in the battle where I thought, oh no, I left a big opening for the jump. And I was a little bit apprehensive. I didn't move my warp spiders in a correct position to screen them. I totally forgot about it. I was kind of wrapped up in the excitement of killing 2 units in, turn 1, basically 1 from shooting and 1 from Overwatch. And I just absolutely forgot to move either Swooping Hawks or Warp Spiders to plug that gap on the left-hand side of the battlefield, basically right to the side of my Wind Riders and Dire Avengers. So yes, he would have charged my Dire Avengers and just slaughtered them. But he rolls the jump, and the jump rolls a 1. And he took about 3 mortal wounds worth of damage after Feel No Pains and all that, and we had a very sad Orc player on the other side of the battlefield. So that was that. Basically, I think he ended up just charging some Striking Scorpions. Both of those units did converge on the Striking Scorpions, and they were pretty much annihilated. So that was that. He took that side of the battlefield pretty easily, but, that was kind of a given. I was letting him take that side. And the other units in the center, again, couldn't move because they were move blocked. And Ghazghkull's unit slowly plodded forward, but I think he rolled like a 1 on the advance roll. So they were very slow. Now, what happened in my turn 2? Well, in my turn 2, most of my units shot forward. I had 2 units on the left-hand side, the Dire Avengers and the Wind Riders, continue to slay Orc unit after Orc unit. They killed another Orc unit in the center, the one behind that ruin right there. I angled it with both my Dire Avengers and Wind Riders to be able to eliminate that unit completely. The Dark Reaper unit was able to kill another unit of Gretchen. Of course, my Rangers were dead. They got charged and died. My Shroudrunners also got charged and died, so those units were destroyed. But he now only had 3 Orc units left and the big unit of Meganobs. Also, at this point, the wall was over, so there was no more advance and charge for his army. And from here, I used a second Shroudrunner unit again to screen as well, screen out on the right side. And I used a unit of Swooping Hawks to go behind enemy lines and actually stole his objective in the back, right? Which was pretty funny. And honestly, when he saw that, and he realized that Ghazghkull, Thraka's Meganobs were going to have to stay behind to kill some Swooping Hawks, I think that was a real blow to him. Because he lost the sticky objectives because the Swooping Hawks got on that objective. And after that, he just kind of had a hard time actually being able to wrap his head around how to win the game. The rest of the game basically revolved around me screening out his units and then proceeding to slaughter them with Wind Riders and Dire Avengers. And, the killing just got easier because after the Pain Boy units were dealt with, all he had was War Boss boys. And those boys, they hit harder, but they don't do, they're not as survivable, basically. And of course, this time around, I did make sure to protect myself from the jump. So that unit ended up getting slaughtered as well down the road. And we ended the game, turn 5, with Ghazghkull Thraka's unit on his home objective. And I had 1 unit of Swooping Hawks in the backfield. And I believe I also had the Wind Riders in the backfield as well. So if I haven't already told you guys, I chose to go with fixed objectives this game because, again, the game plan was always going to be very straightforward. Kill the units as much as I could in the backfield, like the Gretchen, the screening units like that, and then get in the backfield to score, both deploy Teleport Homer and engage on all fronts with the rest of my army. My opponent also went for fixed objectives because his game plan was very straightforward. He went with deploy teleport homer and extend enemy battle lines. So, he wasn't really able to do most of those. He did get a few deploy teleport homers. He did get, I think, one extend battle line in the beginning of the game, I think on turn 2 when he killed those scorpions. But that's about it. He scored on his home objective with Grotskull and the boys. My fire dragons and Fuegan never really got to Grotskull. They just were never in threat range, and I ended up just disembarking him to, finish off an orc unit. Just because they couldn't really do much else, and I ended up using the Falcon as another screening tool. So, unfortunately, didn't, get to actually kill them with the fire dragons, but didn't end up needing to anyway. So, after the game, my opponent and I had a discussion about maybe what improvements could be done to his list to maybe make it a little bit better against matchups like this, which tend to be harder. But we kind of came to the conclusion that Green Tide is just going to have a massive issue against armies like Eldar with a lot of fast MSU units that can screen, as well as hard-hitting damage dealers like Wind Riders and Dire Avengers. And I think the key takeaway here is the Wind Riders. In fact, the Dire Avengers were good, don't get me wrong, but I think they're just a very niche unit. I really wanted to try them out in the matchup. They did do well, but I have to say, I think the Wind Riders are still a little bit better because when you do the math on them, yes, the Dire Avengers with a Zerman allow you to overwatch twice, which is nice, but Wind Riders just do more damage out front, and they also do more damage in Overwatch. You don't get 2 Overwatches, but they are also cheaper than a Zerman with 10 Dire Avengers, and, I really didn't get that much use out of them. Oh, they did do something, I will say this. One Orc Boy and I think it was Pain Boy, ended up charging into the Dire Avenger squad. The Orc Boy killed 1 Dire Avenger, and the Pain Boy killed 2 Dire Avengers, and then a Zerman wiped them both out. So, because a Zerman was there, I was able to finish off the unit. Because between you and me, I don't think those Dire Avengers would have been able to finish off, a single Orc Boy and the Pain Boy. I just don't think they would have actually been able to do it, believe it or not. But, so they did have some use, but again, I think they were rather niche. And the discussion we had was basically this. Green Tide is going to be very effective against armies that are more elite, that you can kind of do a lot of damage to and control the board against, right? A lot of Space Marine builds now are very small, they're very tank heavy, and they're very suited to dealing with, other large targets, other tanks, monsters, etc. But if you're a very fast army like Eldar that has good screening units and very heavy damage dealers like Wind Riders and some of the other units that we have in our army, you're really not going to have that hard of a time against Green Tide. And in fact, it's going to be one of the easier matchups that you come across. And here's the thing, my Orc opponent, this wasn't his first game with Green Tide. He actually played a couple of other games against both Imperial Guard and Dark Angels, and both of those were resounding victories in his favor. So, honestly, Orc Tide, the Green Tide, it's really good in certain matchups, and I think, as far as the meta is right now and where it's at, Green Tide is going to be extremely strong, but it just happens to not be that strong against Eldar. So I guess that's the good news, right? Is that even though Green Tide looks really dominant in competitive play and tournament play and stuff like that, against the right build, it's just not going to do that well. So against a kind of more standard, or at least what is evolving to be the standard Eldar builds, it's not going to be that good. And to kind of further this point and show you an example of what just Overwatch itself does between a unit of Wind Riders and a unit of Dire Avengers, basically, this is the example of what happened in this game. So when the Orc player declares their movement, you can declare Overwatch right away before they move. So unless they declare that they are going to remain stationary, you're going to be able to Overwatch them with the Wind Riders. So the Wind Riders overwatch them, and in my case, I killed 12 of them. That was a little bit of a high roll. You'll probably kill about 8. And then when the Orcs finish their move, the Dire Avengers with a Zerman can overwatch again because it's in the same phase. So his ability allows you to overwatch again, even if it's in the same phase, for 0 CP. So you Overwatch again, they'll probably kill about 6, depending on if they're buffed by guide or not. If they're buffed by guide, they'll kill a little bit more, but they're probably going to kill about 6 orcs. So in total, that's about 14 dead orcs. And they're only going to have 6 orcs and the Pain Boy left in that unit. Now, they, of course, can go in and they can charge Azerman's unit of Dire Avengers. They'll probably wipe the Dire Avengers or at least get close to it. But Azerman should actually be able to wipe the orcs in return. He's very strong. So, is that, super cost effective? Well, I mean, 10 Dire Avengers are cheaper than, 20 orcs. So, yes, I would say probably. And if you don't want this to happen and you want to kind of prevent this, you can always screen out the orcs as well, right? Move a unit of warp spiders forward, shoot the warp spiders, kill a couple more orcs, make sure that they are not really going to be able to actually get into combat with anything. And then at that point, you could just rinse and repeat all game long. All right, so in conclusion, the Green Tide on paper looks absolutely terrifying. But if you have the right tools, they're pretty easy to beat. Having plenty of units that can screen and get behind the Orc Horde once they advance absolutely trivializes the matchup. And having a unit of Wind Riders in the list helped immensely, as their consistently excellent damage helped create the space needed to control the battlefield, which you really need. I think that's the final piece of the puzzle. You need a unit that can do enough damage so that you can create space to move. Because I think one of the worst things about a very fast army like Eldar is actually getting hemmed in. If you get hemmed in a corner, you can't use your mobility and you will lose the game. So you do need that heavy damage dealing unit. And you know what? It's funny because in the beginning of the edition, we had a few units like this. We had Wraithguard and Wraith Knights and all that stuff that could deal heavy damage. But as we transitioned past the September data slate, we saw less of this. We saw way more MSU, and we really didn't see heavy damage dealing units like Wind Riders. But now the meta is shifting, and I think Orcs have kind of started this avalanche to where more players are going to consider this. And as a result, I think you are going to see, again, I know I sound like a broken record already, but you will see more Wind Riders in competitive play. All right, everybody, that's going to be it for today's video. Thanks for watching. Hopefully some of you found this helpful and maybe, kind of can tune your strategies accordingly if you are having trouble against Green Tide or Orcs in general. And, if you are facing Bully Boys, it's much of the same thing. It's going to be all about screening and being able to pick off your opponent's units so that you can create space for your other units to move and gain the mobility advantage. So thank you once again for watching the video, and thank you so much to all my Patreons and supporters who have supported the channel over the last 1.5 years. Your help has greatly improved the channel and helped it grow significantly. If you do want to help support the channel, I have free trials on my Patreon activated, which will grant you permanent access to our Discord community, which is a community of Eldar players and enthusiasts who love talking about strategy, tactics, and of course, hobbying. I will leave the link for that in the description below. I'm also an Amazon affiliate and have a channel store page, so if you want to grab some discounted Eldar miniatures on Amazon or maybe some Eldar-inspired apparel on the channel store page, I will leave those in the description also. All right, everybody, thanks for watching once again, and I'll see you guys next time. Have a good one, everybody. Peace out.